Inferiority Complex, the inner critic with a megaphone. An inferiority complex is like having a personal bully living rent-free in your head, constantly reminding you that everyone else is smarter, more attractive, more successful, and generally better at being human than you are. It's not just low self-esteem, it's a systematic belief that you're fundamentally inadequate compared to other people. This complex usually develops in childhood when you're constantly compared to others, criticized for not being good enough, or made to feel like your worth depends entirely on your achievements. It's like your brain installed faulty software that measures your value by comparing yourself to everyone else's highlight reel. People with inferiority complexes often overcompensate by becoming perfectionists, workaholics, or people pleasers who exhaust themselves trying to prove they're worthy of basic human respect. They might also go the opposite direction and avoid challenges entirely, convinced they'll fail anyway, so why bother trying? What makes inferiority complexes particularly insidious is that they're self-reinforcing. When you believe you're inferior, you interpret neutral events as confirmation of your inadequacy. Someone doesn't text back immediately. Obviously, they think you're boring. You make a mistake at work. Clearly, you're incompetent and everyone knows it. The irony is that people with inferiority complexes often have talents and achievements that objectively contradict their self-perception, but their brain has become a master at dismissing evidence that doesn't fit the "I'm not good enough" narrative. It's like having a filter that only lets through information that makes you feel bad about yourself. The complex creates an exhausting cycle where you either avoid situations where you might be judged, or you overwork yourself trying to be perfect, neither of which actually addresses the underlying belief that you're fundamentally flawed. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No amount of achievement feels like enough. Superiority Complex, the mask that hides insecurity. A superiority complex is like wearing emotional armor made of arrogance to protect a fragile ego that's secretly convinced it's worthless. People with this complex act like they're better than everyone else, but it's usually overcompensation for deep feelings of inadequacy that they can't admit to themselves. This complex often develops as a defense mechanism against feelings of inferiority or shame. Instead of dealing with the painful reality of feeling not good enough, the brain decides to flip the script and insist that everyone else is not good enough instead. It's like psychological jujitsu, redirecting the pain outward instead of dealing with it internally. People with superiority complexes constantly need to prove they're smarter, more successful, or more important than others. They might name drop, brag about achievements, or put others down to maintain their position at the top of their imaginary hierarchy. It's exhausting for everyone involved, including them. What makes superiority complexes particularly problematic is that they prevent genuine connection and growth. When you're convinced you're already the best, you can't learn from others, accept feedback, or develop real intimacy because vulnerability would threaten your superior image. The complex is often accompanied by a deep fear of being found out as ordinary or flawed. Underneath all the bravado is usually someone who's terrified that if people see the real them, they'll be rejected or abandoned. It's like living in constant fear that your superhero costume will slip and reveal you're just a regular person. The tragic part is that superiority complexes often push away the very connection and acceptance that the person actually craves. Their attempts to feel better about themselves by diminishing others creates isolation and conflict, reinforcing the underlying feelings of inadequacy they're trying to escape. Oedipus Complex, the Freudian drama nobody asked for. The Oedipus Complex is like Freud's most controversial psychological theory, having a baby, with Greek mythology, resulting in the idea that children have unconscious sexual desires for their opposite-sex parent and see their same-sex parent as a rival. Yes, it's as weird as it sounds, and yes, Freud was probably projecting his own issues onto everyone else. According to Freudian theory, this complex develops between ages 3 to 6 when children supposedly become aware of anatomical differences and develop unconscious sexual feelings for the opposite-sex parent while viewing the same-sex parent as competition. The theory suggests this gets resolved through identification with the same-sex parent and internalization of social rules. Modern psychology has largely moved away from taking the Oedipus Complex literally, because the idea that toddlers have sexual desires is both unsupported by evidence and deeply problematic. However, some therapists still use it metaphorically to describe unhealthy family dynamics or difficulty separating from parents. What might have some validity is the broader concept of children needing to navigate their relationships with both parents and eventually separate from them to develop their own identity. This process can create temporary conflicts and confusion about relationships and authority, but it's more about psychological psychological development than sexual desire. The complex has been criticized for being heteronormative, sexist, and based more on Freud's personal neuroses than actual psychological research. It assumes nuclear family structures and doesn't account for diverse family arrangements, same-sex parents, or cultural variations in child rearing. The lasting impact of the Oedipus Complex concept is more about how it influenced psychoanalytic thinking than its actual accuracy. It's like a psychological theory that was more influential than it was correct, shaping decades of therapeutic practice despite lacking solid evidence. Electra Complex, the female version that's equally problematic. The Electra Complex is basically the Oedipus Complex sister theory, suggesting that girls go through a phase of being attracted to their fathers while seeing their mothers as rivals. It's named after a Greek myth where Electra helps kill her mother to avenge her father, which should give you some idea of how healthy this psychological framework is. According to psychoanalytic theory, girls supposedly develop penis envy when they realize they don't have male anatomy, then turn to their fathers for affection while viewing their mothers with resentment and competition. The complex is supposedly resolved when girls identify with their mothers and accept their feminine role. Modern feminist psychology has thoroughly criticized the Electra Complex for being based on male-centered assumptions about female psychology and reducing women's development to anatomical envy and competition with other women. It's like trying to understand female psychology through a lens that assumes women are just defective men. The theory reflects the Victorian-era attitudes of Freud's time more than actual psychological development. It pathologizes normal parent-child relationships and creates a framework where healthy family dynamics are interpreted through a sexual lens that most experts now consider inappropriate and inaccurate. Some therapists might use the concept metaphorically to describe cases where daughters have unhealthy attachments to fathers or conflicted relationships with mothers, but this is more about family systems and boundaries than sexual development or anatomical envy. The Electra Complex is mostly important now as an example of how psychological theories can be influenced by cultural biases, and how early psychoanalytic concepts often said more about the theorist's assumptions than actual human development. It's psychological history that's more cautionary tale than clinical tool. God Complex, the delusion of ultimate power. A God complex is like having your ego write checks that reality can't cash. It's the belief that you have divine-like powers, wisdom, or authority over other people's lives. People with this complex act like they're infallible, all-knowing, and entitled to control others without question or accountability. This complex often develops in people who have been given excessive power or praise without appropriate limits or feedback. It can happen to anyone from surgeons who literally hold life and death in their hands, to CEOs who get used to having their every word treated as gospel, to parents who forget their children are separate human beings. People with God complexes genuinely believe they know what's best for everyone else and feel entitled to make decisions for others without their consent. They might manipulate situations to maintain control, dismiss other people's perspectives as inferior, or become enraged when their authority is questioned. What makes God complexes particularly dangerous is that people who have them often do possess some genuine expertise or ability, which makes it easier for them to rationalize their controlling behavior. A skilled surgeon might extend their medical expertise into believing they know how everyone should live their lives. The complex creates a bubble of self-deception where the person becomes increasingly disconnected from reality and feedback. They surround themselves with people who validate their superiority and dismiss anyone who challenges them as ignorant or rebellious. The God complex is especially problematic in positions of actual power, where the person's delusions can cause real harm to others. It's like giving someone who thinks they're Superman the ability to actually affect other people's lives. The combination of power and delusion creates a perfect storm for abuse and dysfunction. Martyr Complex, the professional victim with a purpose. A martyr complex is like turning suffering into a full-time job with excellent emotional benefits. People with this complex constantly sacrifice themselves for others, then use that sacrifice as currency to control relationships and maintain their identity as the noble, long-suffering hero of every situation. This complex often develops in families or environments where love and attentions are only given to people who are suffering or self-sacrificing. The person learns that being a victim or constantly helping others is the only way to feel valuable and get their emotional needs. People with martyr complexes will often take on excessive responsibility for others' problems, refuse help when offered, and then complain about how much they're suffering and how little appreciation they receive. They're like emotional accountants who keep detailed records of every sacrifice to use as leverage. What makes martyr complexes particularly frustrating is that the person genuinely believes they're being selfless and noble when they're actually being manipulative and controlling. They use their suffering as a weapon to make others feel guilty and compliant. The complex creates relationships where other people feel constantly indebted and guilty, while the martyr gets to maintain their identity as the victim and hero simultaneously. It's like emotional extortion disguised as generosity. Look how much I've sacrificed for you, now you owe me. Martyr complexes prevent genuine intimacy because the relationships become transactional rather than mutual. The martyr can't accept love or help without losing their identity, and others can't express needs or boundaries without being made to feel selfish and ungrateful. Napoleon Complex. The short fuse of overcompensation. The Napoleon Complex is like having your height become your entire personality. It's the tendency for shorter people, particularly men, to be more aggressive, dominating, or competitive to compensate for perceived disadvantages related to their stature. It's named after Napoleon Bonaparte, who was supposedly short but actually average height for his time. This complex reflects how physical characteristics can become psychological focal points that shape entire personalities and life strategies. When someone believes their height disadvantages them socially or professionally, they might overcompensate by being louder, more aggressive, or more controlling than necessary. People with Napoleon complexes might pick fights with larger people, become obsessed with status symbols, or develop hyper-competitive personalities that exhaust everyone around them. They're like chihuahuas who think they're Great Danes, all bark and attitude to make up for size. What makes this complex problematic is that it often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The aggressive overcompensation can create the very rejection and conflict the person is trying to avoid, reinforcing their belief that they need to fight harder to get respect. The complex also reveals how societal biases about physical characteristics can become internalized and shape psychological development. Height discrimination is real in some contexts, but the Napoleon complex represents a maladaptive response that often creates more problems than it solves. Modern research suggests that while some correlations exist between height and certain behaviors, the Napoleon complex is more about individual psychology and social learning than inevitable biological destiny. It's like a psychological strategy that sometimes backfires spectacularly. Messiah Complex, the savior nobody asked for. A Messiah Complex is like believing you're the main character in everyone else's story and that your job is to rescue them from their problems, whether they want rescuing or not. People with this complex genuinely believe they have a special mission to save others and the world depends on their intervention. This complex often develops in people who received praise and attention for helping others during childhood, or who grew up in chaotic environments where they learned to feel valuable only when they were fixing things or taking care of people. People with Messiah complexes insert themselves into other people's problems, offer unsolicited advice and help, and become resentful when their rescue efforts aren't appreciated. They're like emotional paramedics who keep showing up to accidents that aren't actually emergencies. What makes Messiah complexes particularly problematic is that they prevent other people from developing their own problem-solving skills and autonomy. The savior creates dependency while convincing themselves they're being helpful and necessary. The complex often masks deep insecurity and need for control. By positioning themselves as the rescuer, people with Messiah complexes get to feel important and needed while avoiding their own problems and vulnerabilities. It's like emotional displacement disguised as altruism. Messiah complexes can be especially damaging in professional helping roles, parenting, or romantic relationships where the power imbalance makes it easier to rationalize controlling behavior as care and concern. The person genuinely believes they know what's best for others and feels entitled to impose their help. The conclusion: complexes are complicated. So there you have it. Every major psychological complex explained, from the inferiority complex that makes you feel like everyone else got a manual for life that you never received, to the Messiah complex that makes you think you are the manual for everyone else's life. The fascinating thing about psychological complexes is that they're all attempts to solve problems. They're just really bad solutions that often create bigger problems than they solve. Every complex represents someone's brain trying to protect them from pain, rejection, or inadequacy, but using strategies that ultimately backfire. But here's what therapists love to point out. Recognizing these patterns in yourself isn't about self-diagnosis or self-criticism. It's about understanding that we all develop psychological strategies for dealing with life. And sometimes those strategies need updating when they stop serving us. The goal isn't to eliminate all complexes or become a perfectly balanced human being. That's probably impossible and definitely boring. The goal is to develop enough self-awareness that your complexes don't run your life without your consent. Whether you're dealing with feeling inferior to everyone, superior to everyone, or responsible for saving everyone, remember that these patterns develop for reasons and can be changed with awareness, practice, and probably some good therapy. Your psychological complexes are like emotional software that was installed during childhood and adolescence. Some of it is still useful, some of it needs updates, and some of it needs to be completely uninstalled and replaced with better programs. If this video helped you recognize some patterns in yourself or others that suddenly make a lot more sense, smash that like button, subscribe for more psychology that explains why humans are so wonderfully weird, and drop a comment letting me know which complex hit a little too close to home. Trust me, we've all got our psychological quirks. Apparently, they even have fancy names and everything.